It is 111 BC, and King Yugurtha of Numidia has thoroughly shaken up the Roman beehive. He had finished consolidating power over his kingdom, and there were few family members left that could challenge his claim as king. Things may have been stable domestically, but his foreign relations were anything but. Rome was going to war with him, for repeatedly disobeying the rules of don't murder your brothers and relatives, and all around just being a general pain in the butt. But he wasn't too worried. Yugurtha had studied Roman battle tactics, and was confident he could humiliate them on the battlefield as badly as he had politically. The Romans got some legions and arrived the following year. This first phase of the war involved small skirmishes, with Yugurtha refusing to partake in a fixed battle. When the armies finally clashed in 109 BC, it was completely on Yugurtha's terms. He baited the legions into a trap and defeated the Romans so badly that they agreed to leave Numidia altogether. On their way out, Yugurtha even had them pass under the yoke, basically a ritual of submission that served no other purpose other than to humiliate the legions. After the loss, Roman voters were clamoring for new leadership. The man they chose to take over the campaign as consul was Quintus Caecilius Metellus. Metellus was a great candidate, as he was well known for being incorruptible, which meant no bribes, Yugurtha's worst nightmare. His family, the Metelli, was powerful and well connected during this period. Metellus used these connections to find the most experienced commanders he could to serve under him, but this proved more difficult a task than he had hoped. Rome's borders had expanded from Spain to Turkey, and the constant wars protecting the new frontiers had taken its toll on Roman manpower. Reluctantly, he chose Gaius Marius to serve as his legate. The two were political rivals, but Metellus knew that Marius would do a good job, so he decided to look past their political differences for the time being. Unfortunately for him, Marius had other plans. After a half-hearted attempt at negotiations by Yugurtha, he and Metellus met in combat in the summer of 109, after the Romans walked into another trap set by the Numidians. But this time, the Romans held the line, and although neither side could really claim victory, the Numidians took significant casualties. But Yugurtha would not give up that easy, and he personally rode to the surrounding villages, where he soon replenished his forces and was ready to again bait Metellus and the Romans. When word reached Metellus that Yugurtha was already back at full strength, he realized that every time he beat the Numidians, Yugurtha could simply disappear and re-emerge later with a fresh army, until his own legions were not able to carry on the war any longer. Metellus decided to switch strategies. The goal of the war would no longer be to defeat Yugurtha in a pitched battle, but instead to occupy the entire kingdom. When Yugurtha had no more land under his control, he would be unable to recruit an army and be defeated. From a military perspective, this was a really good move. It maximized the advantages of the Roman Republic while minimizing the chance that Yugurtha would lead them into another devastating ambush, as well as getting rid of his home field manpower advantage. Yugurtha adapted as best he could to Metellus' new strategy. He sent all his infantry home so that his army consisted solely of the light cavalry that Numidia was known for. He used his fast-moving army to harass Roman supply lines and ambush stragglers. But his luck was running out. Numidians were getting tired of war, and let's be honest, this war was 100% his fault. Another attempt at negotiating a surrender was made, but Yugurtha declined at the last minute and fled to the far reaches of Numidia, where he'd disappear for a while, plotting his return. Now Metellus' strategy was working, and it had come this close to ending the war. But for the politicians in Rome, that clearly wasn't good enough. Enemies of the Metelli family went on and on that the war wasn't being won fast enough, and Metellus had not won a real battle since he first landed in North Africa. Marius himself influenced many of the other officers to complain about Metellus, even as he was fighting the war. He was preparing to run for consul in 108, but to do this he'd have to make it back to Rome. This put him in an awkward position of having a conversation with Metellus that went something like, "Can I have a leave of absence?" "What for? We're kind of in the middle of a war." "Oh, I want to run for your job so I can replace you." Needless to say, Metellus declined. After that, Marius went from passive-aggressive to straight-up a hindrance to Metellus, openly saying that if he were in charge, the war would be over in a couple of weeks. When a possible deserter showed up, Marius urged Metellus that the man must be executed as an example to the rest of the men. But when Metellus complied, Marius complained to his supporters how the deserter was punished much too harshly for a crime without sufficient evidence. Eventually, Metellus threw his hands up and was like, "Alright, fine, go home. I'll do this myself." With politics aside for now, the war continued at Metellus' slow pace. Yugurtha found himself deep in the Atlas Mountains, where he lived with a small force of Numidians and a tribe of nomads. Yugurtha hired the tribe as his own mercenary army. While he was securing the new force, he also convinced Bocchus, the king of neighboring Mauritania, to join the war on his side. Bocchus had been watching the Romans gain power in North Africa and was anxious to knock them down a few pegs. Plus, the two kings were related. It's unclear how exactly, but in any case, Bocchus was not willing to see his relative killed and his kingdom annexed. Bocchus, Jugurtha, and his nomads crossed back into Numidia, marching towards Cirta. Metellus was aware of the new force, and began planning how he should respond. But before he could make a plan, he received a letter from Rome. Gaius Marius had been elected consul. Not only that, but the Senate had decided to give Marius command over the war in North Africa, essentially firing Metellus. Sources describe Metellus' reaction to the news through their old-timey flowery language, but there was no pretty way to put it. He was pissed. Although the former consul presumably steamed the entire boat ride back to Rome, his return wasn't entirely bitter. He still had plenty of support in the city. And as a kind of consolation prize, they awarded him a triumph, which is essentially a big Roman parade in his honor. They even gave him a fancy last name, Metellus Numidicus, to recognize his achievements in the war. Marius had run on the platform that he would end the war swiftly by capturing Jugurtha and destroying his armies, but when he made it to Numidia, he realized that what Metellus was doing was actually working pretty well. Whenever he got close to Jugurtha, he would disappear with his faster-moving troops. Marius also ran into problems with finding officers just like Metellus had, so he had to look for people he might consider unsavory at first glance. One of these was a quaestor named Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an aristocrat patrician who we'd today classify as the trust fund frat boy type. Despite his entitled background, Marius still decided to recruit Sulla as a legate, and the two met up in Numidia. Marius and Sulla managed to engage Jugurtha and Bocchus into a pitched battle, by which I mean they stumbled into another ambush. This time, Sulla did some quick thinking and outflanked the Numidians, routing them and saving the legions. The next battle was not an ambush, and the Romans completely destroyed Jugurtha's force. The king again fled south to find more mercenaries. Bocchus, however, was doing some thinking. The war was not going his way, yet he realized that he was in a unique position that he could leverage against the Romans or Jugurtha. He opened up negotiations, and Marius sent Sulla to strike a deal. Bocchus met with Sulla, who told him that they were open to peace as long as they handed over Jugurtha. Bocchus agreed and requested that Sulla come to his court for the official negotiations. Sulla made it to Bocchus alive, despite traveling right past Jugurtha's newest army, which at one point was only 2 miles away. When Sulla arrived, Bocchus offered to essentially become an ally of Rome as a tributary, as well as, of course, Jugurtha. Bocchus also purposely leaked information to Jugurtha's spy network that Jugurtha could still totally convince him to backstab the Romans if he gave them a good enough deal. Jugurtha quickly replied that he gave Bocchus a third of Numidia, as well as an alternative peace plan. He told him to kidnap Sulla, who he knew was a prominent citizen in Rome. Then as a bargaining chip, he'd keep Sulla as ransom until the Romans left. If Bocchus took this, Mauritania would be the dominant power in North Africa, but the Romans wouldn't be gone for long. The Roman Republic had a strange habit of losing their wars at first, but no matter how bad things got, they always came back, and there was no reason this time wouldn't be different. Mauritania, on the other hand, was completely done fighting. The other option was handing over Jugurtha, which would mean that he would not only be betraying his relative, but he would also cost Mauritania its independence, a surefire way of causing revolts all across your country. After a night of deliberation, Bocchus set up a meeting with Jugurtha. To the Numidians' dismay, Bocchus had his soldiers killed and put Jugurtha in chains. Then he gave him over to Sulla. After 12 years of political and military maneuvering, Jugurtha was finally in Roman custody. Sulla delivered Jugurtha to Marius, and they all returned to Rome. This victory secured Marius his second consulship in 104. He was thrown a triumph, and it reportedly was the biggest one in some time, but the centerpiece was Jugurtha. He had been public enemy number 1 since he had murdered the Italian minority in Numidia, while disposing of his brothers, but now he was defeated. The former king was thrown in jail, where he was stripped and given no food or water. Unlike his last visit, he had no one to help him and no one he could bribe. King Jugurtha lasted 6 days in his cell before he died, outplayed by his own ambition. But Marius could not totally celebrate his victory. Sulla had been the one to actually capture Jugurtha, and he didn't let anyone forget it. Just as Marius had undermined Metellus, Sulla was now undermining Marius. This turned the distaste Marius had for Sulla into hatred, and spoiler alert, things between them just get worse from here.